Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and as the Wall Street Journal reports, U.S. ran $666 billion deficit in fiscal 2017, sixth highest on record. So you see that 666 kind of stood out to us as well because, of course, it pops up often. I find we did a report, I believe it was August 2016, where we had a similar situation with the number 666, where Business Insider UK reported there have now been 666 interest rate cuts worldwide since the collapse of Lehman Brothers. Anyway, I just wanted to, put that out there so people can kind of look at that. I'm not saying anything's necessarily going on with that. It just seems a little odd. Anyway, so
to be fond of that number, talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the Wall Street Journal article, as it says, the federal budget deficit widened in fiscal year 2017 to the sixth highest deficit on record as government spending growth outpaced growth in tax collections for the second year in a row, the U.S. Treasury Department said Thursday. The budget's shortfall rose to $666 billion in the fiscal year that ended on September 30th, up $80 billion or 14% from fiscal year 2016. That tracks with an estimate from the Congressional Budget Office, which had predicted a $668 billion deficit for the last fiscal year. Federal tax receipts reached a record high in fiscal year 2017 at $3.3 trillion thanks to slightly faster growth, according to a senior Treasury official. So let's go into this, John. Can you kind of go into where this is coming from? What's exactly going on with the deficit that we are currently witnessing?
Yeah, well, actually the current deficit, when I look at the official numbers, if you look at usedebtclock.org, the numbers are $685 billion. So it's even worse than what they've been mentioning here.
They just like saying the word 666 at the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah. Now also the U.S. federal spending, we mentioned it, slightly that it just popped above $4 trillion. The government is just massively increased. And of course, the increase in government also is the increase in the pay that they have to pay their employees because of higher inflation, and it just feeds more inflation because the problem is the government employees doesn't create anything or they need to get paid from their own money that they create. So they recycle the money, but if you have all government employees, there'll be recycled money and then it will just stop and they're going to print money out of thin air in order to cover the shortfall. So that at one time, if the government gets too big, it's just going to be,
If it gets too big, it already has, in my personal opinion.
It's massive, yeah.
By existing.
Yeah, by existing, yeah, exactly. No, it's very interesting. Like when you look at the actual, numbers of the spending that they have, per citizen, it's $62,648,000 in debt per person that exists. That's including the kids and everybody. And then per taxpayer, it's $169,251. That is the total debt that the U.S. government have racked up now. And now we just saw, with the postponing, we were talking about that postponing of the budget. There wasn't a real, increase in the debt ceiling yet. It hasn't happened yet. The new decision on the rate hike is, of course, the 8th of December. It's been postponed to that to see if they're, not the rate hike, they're actually going to look at, increasing the debt ceiling.
Yeah.
But this just comes down to, overspending and the belief in these Keynesian economists that they, think that they can spend money out of thin air. It's just a complete lie, and they're just racking up more and more debt, and it's so unsustainable and never going to get paid back, Josh.
No, of course. Well, it goes into this whole dependency of debt servitude that we talk about so much here at WAM. Obviously, the government wants us in debt because a populace in debt is a populace in servitude, and they shove us down that bottomless pit of debt, and we're forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system, and that puts us in perfect servitude. But, this continues to just go on and on and on, and obviously this push towards a debt ceiling decision where there's a possible government shutdown that could happen, and if there's a government shutdown, they're still going to extort you for your taxes and continue doing inefficient nonsense while pretending to shut down by spending more money on putting gates in front of national parks and telling veterans that they can't look at veteran memorials memorials. It's ridiculous. It's absolute sham. But I mean, we saw the national debt get past $20 trillion recently, and it's been skyrocketing since. It just keeps going up and up and up, where it's at 20,425,513,000,000, and that's just as we do this video. By the time this video is up, it'll already be up from that. It's just absolutely sickening. But going into it further, though, John, where is this deficit? Where is this going to lead? I mean, in the next coming months.
Well, where it's going to lead, the thing is, they're never going to be able to pay that debt off whatsoever. It's not going to happen. And then looking at the whole warmongering thing that's going on, they're just going to keep on expanding this government spending, and that's what happens. You have a government, they want job security, so they gotta keep themselves in, be able to sustain themselves. And what governments usually do, and I have a company I work for that have some government contracts, and what we see every single December, they panic because they haven't used up their budget, which would be great. Like, they're actually, would get less next year. No, they just spend it on something that they're never going to use. Like, for example, wiring up a building that, nobody's going to ever stay in. So things like that the government does, in order to, keep their money flow going. And of course, it's all about job security here. That's all that it is for the government, because the government wants job security. Everybody that has a job wants job security, but the problem is we have so many people working in the government.
Well, and then just moving on from that as well, we see what the Federal Reserve is doing, just constant printing of fiat currency. All fiat currencies eventually revert to their intrinsic value of zero, always have, always will, hundreds of times over the last 1,000 years since 1024 AD in China, and it just continues. People keep pushing this Keynesian idea around and expect different results, and it really is insanity. And it'll just continue as they print more and more and more, and just add zeros to the money. And I actually spoke with someone in Venezuela, from Venezuela recently, in a rideshare in BC, and he basically confirmed everything that we've been called crazy for talking about by a bunch of well-intentioned socialists in the United States and Canada, where it's exactly what happened. They just kept printing zeros and zeros and zeros, and like restricting people from very simple individual liberties, and restricting people from doing what they pleased, out of we must crush capitalists and blah 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 blah. And it was Chavez and Maduro that did it, and we just continue to see massive government spending, the politicians living in palaces as people had to eat out of gutters, bread lines, etc. And it just kept piling up. And the whole time there's people going, oh, don't worry, they're just doing what they need to do to fix things, make sure that the poor can eat, and we have healthcare and blah blah blah. And this is always how it turns out, just vast spending, vast printing, and vast amounts of regulations, taxes, and laws. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. But John, you did some research into you looked at the balance sheets since 2008, and gold holdings, etc. Can you go into, just in context with what we're talking about right now, just a quick little
first of all, I'm going to mention a number. So the United States has a debt to GDP ratio which is 105.47, and Kenneth Rogoff, to mention Kenneth Rogoff, we talked about him before, the curse of cash, talking about cashless society. But he did also research on, throughout history, what have actually toppled government and made them go bankrupt. And every time they saw that when governments went over 90% debt to GDP, that's when they were unsustainable, and it just toppled on itself. So, well, they're 15, over that already. With percentage wise, so you just see that it becomes unsustainable. Now, going back to the balance sheet, because all this deficit spending, who's bought all this debt? Well, lately there's been people selling the US debt, and who's buying it? Well, it's the Federal Reserve. So we look at the balance sheet since 2008, and it has risen an approximate 553.63%. That is a ridiculous increase.
Seems a little volatile.
And that is, not, of course, all U.S. debt. It's also the mortgage-backed securities, other debt that are basically bankrupt because nobody wants it anymore. So that's what happened, and they went from about 800 billion to 445 trillion in the mass amounts of balance sheet. Now they're talking about selling it off. It's never going to happen. Nobody's going to want that U.S. debt. And at one point, all this debt is going to flow back to all the money that they printed and sent everywhere else is going to come back to the States, and you have a hyperinflation on your hand. So this is completely unsustainable, and it will eventually, very soon come crashing down.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen is, people are going to say finally, we have had enough of this, world reserve currency of the US dollar. And this massive spending, and that the U.S. just devaluing it constantly. So we're gonna just remove ourselves from it and say this is enough. We had enough, and the U.S. dollar will not cease to exist, but it would be completely devalued.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the fundamentals are off the table due to the level of manipulation in the monetary system, so you can't put a date on when the crash is coming, but you know it's going to happen. It has to happen. It literally has to happen. So, no, people weren't wrong to say the dollar is going to crash 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. They're absolutely right. It's just the central planning is so out of control that they propped it up to an extent where eventually, it's going to come crashing down at a far faster and harder rate than it would have anyways. And looking at just the growth in the size of government as well, I mean, eventually you build and build and build onto that government, and it gets heavier and heavier, and then the people at the bottom are forced to hold it up, and eventually they get crushed underneath it, and everything comes toppling down. So I think we need to be aware of the controlled implosion of the markets and the monetary system in the near future, and be overly prepared rather than underprepared and reaping the consequences of that.
Oh, totally. It's so important to prepare yourself for this inevitable thing that's going to be the bankruptcy of the system, because it's unsustainable. And it usually happens very fast within a year. It's all a trust game. When that link of trust is broken, there's the demise of the currency in a very fast manner. We've seen it. Every single currency that I studied had usually a year span, the hyperinflations had, when they just completely eviscerated in value.
Absolutely. Now, finishing it off, because whenever we don't mention it, we face the consequences in the comments of the video. So, solutions: food, water, shelter, defense, so you're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block, as well as cryptocurrencies, that which is decentralized, gold and silver, of course, assets, and stay out of the centralized system, stay away from the government at all costs, literally, and do whatever you can to ensure that you are prepared in the inevitable crash and collapse, so that you can protect your family, educate your friends, etc. Get the word out there, because people are incredibly underprepared. Just talking to any random person on the street, they have absolutely no idea what's happening. They don't know what money is. They don't understand how markets work or don't work or centralized.
See the price go up.
Yeah, they don't see, the issues with derivatives and government manipulation. They don't see the problems in the monetary system of artificial just printing, centralization, and the creation of debt and inflation. You need to help get that word out, because there's going to be a lot of people suffering when it comes crashing down. And while myself and John won't be suffering as much because we're preparing ourselves, a lot of people will be on the wrong side of this issue, and they will reap the consequences, as I said. So, finishing it off, thanks for going into this with us, John. And until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. This is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth,
Be the change.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized by the Anti-Defamation League on YouTube, as they flag all of our content as hate speech. You can also find our Bitcoin address in the description in the comments, as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. You can also find me at Josh Sigurdson at steemit.com. That's steemit.com, the future of social media, as the dinosaur social media digs its own grave. You get paid in cryptocurrency, Steem that is, on steemit.com via the upvote of your posts, so I hope to see you there. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.